Pratham, start in 5.
Yes. Namaste and greetings. I, Shweta Shankar, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on Defense, Foreign Policy and Union Budget 2024 to 25. This deliberation is a part of IMPRI 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25, which is a series of panel discussions on crucial key policy issues and Union Budget 2024-25, involving more than 100 thematic distinguished experts and research team members. This discussion is organized by the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. As part of IMPRI #Web Policy Talk series, the State of International Affairs, #Diplomacy Dialogue. Now let me introduce the esteemed gathering. Our chair for the session is DrnSimi Mehta ji, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. Welcome, ma'am. Today's deliberation comprises of an excellent distinguished panel of experts who will be sharing expertise, which includes Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji, a retired professor of International Relations, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and a visiting professor at IMPRI. Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji, VSM retired, strategic thinker on security issues, and a visiting senior fellow at IMPRI. Mr. Robinder N. Sachdev ji, President, the Imagindia Institute, New Delhi, founder of the Lemonade Party. Ambassador Anil Trigunaya ji, Distinguished Fellow at Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and a visiting Distinguished Fellow at IMPRI. Dr. Lakshman Behra ji, Associate Professor at Special Center for National Security Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And Professor Swaran Singh ji, Professor and Chairperson at the Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. We are extremely grateful to have such a distinguished panel of experts joining us today. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested and putting your time, energy, and efforts into understanding the nuances of gender and social inclusion within the Union budget and while helping us to bring together the practitioners and participants through this course for impactful discussion. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. Firstly, I would pass it on to the IMPRI team for a brief presentation on the budget. Over to Rishmita.
Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we gather to discuss a matter of paramount importance, India's defense allocation in the Union budget for the fiscal year 24-25. As we delve into this topic, we'll explore the key aspects of the budget, its implications, and the broader context in which it exists. The Finance Minister has allocated 6.2521 lakh crore towards the defense sector for financial year 25. This figure represents a slight decrease of 0.01 lakh crore from the 6.22 lakh crore announced in the interim budget. However, it is crucial to note that the defense spending remains the highest among all ministries, accounting for 13.04% of the central government's overall budget expenditure. Moreover, this allocation amounts to 1.9% of the projected GDP, maintaining consistency with the previous year's figures. Now, we'll move on to the allocation breakdown. So, in general, the defense allocation has been broken down into Army, Navy, and Air Force, which you can see on the presentation. Furthermore, the allocation has been broken down into capital allocation, revenue allocation, and the pension allocation, along with the strategic allocation. So the capital allocation is 1.72 lakh crore or 27.67% of the total defense budget, which has been earmarked for the capital acquisition. This significant portion is crucial for modernizing our armed forces and enhancing our defense capabilities. The revenue expenditure is 92,088 crore has been allocated for the armed forces, excluding salaries. This covers essential day-to-day operational expenses. The pension allocation is 1.41 lakh crore, which has been set aside for defense pensions, ensuring we fulfill our commitments to our veterans. The strategic allocations have been divided into border infrastructure, Indian Coast Guard, and the DRDO, which is the Defense Research and Development Organization. So 6,500 crore has been used for strengthening the border infrastructure, 7,651.80 crore for the Indian Coast Guard, and 23,855 crore for the Defense Research and Development Organization. Moving on to the analysis of this budget. Okay, so could you please move the slides further? So this is the graphical representation of the allocation of the budget. Now we'll move on to the analysis of the budget in a global context. So as we analyze this budget, it is imperative to consider the rapidly changing geopolitical scenarios on the global stage. The ongoing conflicts between the Israel and Hamas, the Russia and Ukraine, and China's assertive actions in the South China Sea all underscore the need for preparedness. Of particular concern are the Chinese maneuvers at the line of actual control and in the Indian Ocean region, which pose significant challenges to India's territorial integrity. The budget has two objectives that is Atmanirbharta, which is self-reliance, and exports. Atmanirbharta, so for Atmanirbharta, 1.05 lakh crore has been allocated for domestic capital procurement, reinforcing our commitment to indigenous defense production. The DRDO's allocation of 23,855 crore with 13,208 crore focused on developing new technologies and fundamental research further underscores this commitment. The second objective, which is the defense export. India has achieved remarkable success in this area, with defense exports reaching a record of 21,883 crore in the financial year 23-24, marking a 32.5% growth over the previous fiscal year. This success contributes significantly to India's goal of becoming a 5 trillion economy by 2027. To conclude the defense budget allocation for 24-25, it represents a balanced approach to addressing immediate security needs while investing in long-term capabilities. The focus on self-reliance and export promotion is commendable, but the challenges remain in terms of modernization and keeping up with global military advancements. It's worth noting that while India's defense budget has a steady growth over the past 4 years, from 4.7 lakh crore in 2020 to 6.21 lakh crore right now, we still lag behind global powers like United States, China, and Russia in terms of absolute military spending. As we move forward, it will be crucial to A, continue investing in cutting-edge technologies, B, foster a robust domestic defense industrial base, and C, enhance diplomatic and strategic partnerships to complement our military capabilities. The path ahead requires not just financial commitment, but also strategic foresight and adaptability. India's defense preparedness will play a pivotal role in shaping the position of the global stage in the coming years. Now, we will look at the figures for the Ministry of External Affairs allocations. So, yeah, so the net expenditure in which was budgeted was 18,050 crore, and the budget for this year sees an increase of 22,154.67 crores. We can further see the breakdown of the allocation of the Ministry of External Affairs. So it has been broken down into total establishment expenditure of the center, the total center sectors, schemes or projects, the other central sector expenditure, and other services, social services, economic services, and total services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rishmita. I would now like to invite, it is my honor and privilege to invite Dr. Simi Mehta ji to start the program with the chair's opening remarks and proceed with the panel discussion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Shweta and Rishmita, for this wonderful overview of the budget allocations. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5th annual series of Thematic Deliberations and Analysis of the Union Budget 24-25 from the IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. So while we have had an overview of the budgetary allocations that was revealed this year on the 23rd of July by our Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, we need to understand how this plays into the defense and foreign policy. There has been a substantial some increase in the allocations in the Ministry of External Affairs and a slight in the defense budget, which is the highest in the overall allocations. We have with us experts who would delve into the details of it as to what are the implications of this year's budget on the foreign policy as well as on the defense policy, what are the concerns and whether the allocations are sufficient, what can be improved so that India is well on the track to the Atmanirbharta as well as to become on the path of the global powerhouse and a force to reckon with. So I welcome all of you, and without wasting much time, I would like to invite Professor Bhattacharya for her remarks. Madam, over to you. Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya.
Thank you so much, Simi, and I also wish to thank IMPRI and especially Dr. Arjun Kumar for inviting me to this panel discussion on the Union Budget 24-25 and what I interpret as the analysis of its implications on foreign policy and defense preparedness. What I wish, my greetings to my fellow panelists also. And what I wish to say right in the beginning, that the budget should be looked at holistically. We should not take it separately, MEA. Of course, we have to take that MEA or MOD separately, but we have to see how it gels with basically the main objectives of the budget, okay, in its totality. The allocations have already been given here, so I do not need to kind of repeat, except I want to say a couple of things, both about the MEA and the MOD. Firstly, the budget estimate for the MEA in FY 2024-25 is 22,155 crores. That falls short of the revised estimate of 29,121 crores for 23-24. Still, the MEA basically saw a significant budgetary increase of approximately 23% over the previous year. The increased allocation partially delivers on recommendations of the 21st report of the Parliamentary Commission on External Affairs for the MEA 2022-23 to strengthen the ministry's capacity and resources to better serve India's foreign policy objectives. However, one must note that it is still only 0.4% of the total union budget, which falls far short of even the committee's recommended figure of 1%. And second, the budget allocation to the Ministry of Defense was 621,940 crores, which was the highest among all the ministries. And basically, it was a 4.79% increase over the last year's budget, 23-24 budget. But let's look at it also in dollar terms. In dollar terms, it comes to about $75 billion. What is noteworthy is that China's 2024 defense budget amounted to $231.36 billion, which is only 2% of its GDP. And the US last year spent $858 billion on defense. Even Pakistan hiked its defense budget by 17.6% in 2024 compared to 2023 to rupees 2,122 billion. This is not much for the armed forces, but according to the newspaper Dawn, major military acquisitions and funding for nuclear weapons and missile programs are believed to be funded from separate channels that are hidden under the classified budget line, which of course we cannot see. So the question is the adequacy of India allocating 1.9% of its GDP to, or 1.6% according to some, of its GDP to defense in an increasingly complex neighborhood where China is a major competitor for the favors of India's neighbors. And that is a moot point. Now, in this limited time, I'd like to point to some important facts, three important facts actually, and raise two important issues regarding the budget and our defense and foreign policy. First, India aims at three targets: Viksit Bharat by 2047, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and Vishwa Bandhu, that is basically a friend of the world. So, development, self-reliance, and global status as a global player. The three are mutually complementary and are interlinked, and we cannot really separate one from the other. We cannot have a developed India without a self-reliant economy, and these contribute to a future global status. Just imagine, if the US did not have a vibrant economy in the 1940s, it could not have funded the Marshall Plan, which actually brought Western Europe to its to its side. It could not also, in the 1950s and 60s, or especially in the 1960s, drawn up plans like programs like the USAID, the USAID, which made it a kind of Vishwabandhu for many countries. So even if the present budget focuses on agriculture, employment, human development, manufacturing, and services, R&D, energy security, and human development, many of these sectors are also linked to the Indian defense and foreign policies. For instance, the Ministry of Defense has earmarked, as has been pointed out, 75% of its modernization budget, that is 105,518.43 crores for procurement through domestic industries this fiscal year. This will have a multiplier effect on the GDP, employment generation, and capital formation, providing stimulus to the defense industry. Again, 13,208 crores of the allocation for the DRDO, which totals 23,246.89 crores, is earmarked for capital expenditure with a focus on new technologies, emphasizing fundamental research and hand-holding of private partners through the development and production partnerships. There's also a technical development fund of rupees 60 crores. This has been earmarked for startups, MSMEs, and academia, aiming at self-reliance in the defense technology and manufacturing sector. That is an Atmanirbhar Bharat, which obviously will become a Viksit Bharat. Similarly, in foreign policy related issues also, the government announced an import duty cut on smartphones and some of its components. This will no doubt help consumers. This is also meant for consumers, definitely. But at the same time, it ought to come as a boost to India's attempt to take a greater share of global electronics manufacturing. India's electronic industry today is largely an assembler of components manufactured elsewhere. But high duties act as an obstacle to firms which wish to embed themselves in the global supply chains. And this cut basically will ease the process. Certain duties, or basically the customs duties on gold and silver, for instance, have been reduced to 5% and platinum to 6.5%. This would help the jewelry industry in India, and India is actually an exporter of, diamonds are brought in here and they're made into goods and manufactured elsewhere, and platinum is the base. Okay. In fact, customs duties have largely been revised to rationalize ease of trade and reduce disputes. For example, basic customs duty has been largely, or it's called BCD in the new terms. It has been fully exempted for 25 rare earth minerals like lithium. This will also help the electronics and other manufacturing industries in India and basically promote Atmanirbharta as well as exports. To boost India's seafood exports, in fact, we are a big seafood exporter. BCD, that is Basic Customs Duty on broodstock, polychaete worms, shrimps, and fish feed have also been reduced to 5%. Here, in fact, foreign policy aligns with India's economic growth. The point that I'm trying to make is that budget allocation to the MOD or the MEA should not be seen only in isolation, but we have to see it in the context of the total target of the annual budget for 24-25, which is, of course, employment generation, agricultural growth, which also includes the fishing industry, etc. And basically development, okay, Viksit Bharat. The second point is about India's foreign policy itself and its aim to be a global player. And what you find in this in the present budget is that a new kind of differentiated narrative is emerging, which encompasses India's entry into the global trade regimes. On the one hand, there is aid. On the other hand, there is LOC, and there's also private-public partnerships, and also a bringing in of the private sector into this. Now, basically, but what is needed is greater effort on the Make in India initiative, expansion and professionalization of supply chains and attendant infrastructure, positioning itself as a service exporter beyond the IT services, and so on. In fact, in today's world, the economic is as important as security in bilateral and multilateral relations. And in fact, the economic helps to bind security to a certain extent. And basically, so one of the agendas of the MEA also is to bring in investments nowadays. There used to be earlier an attaché, a junior attaché attached for economic affairs, but today, in fact, the ambassadors also play a very important role here. The other side of the coin is being a Vishwa Bandhu, giving aid, building infrastructure, and providing emergency relief to countries. The idea being to be a friend in need, and also basically to create a more stable region, not only basically for security, but also for trade, which is very important. And here, India is beginning with its own neighborhood, which needs to be strategically secured for its own safety and security. And this can be done through its neighborhood first policy, which was first mooted in 2008. But basically, it really goes back to the 1960s and things like the ITEC program, which was a kind of P2P, people-to-people contact program there. But we're not talking about that. The neighborhood first policy involves aid on the one hand, grant debtors, and lines of credit. The idea being that financial support will help to stabilize the neighborhood, make it more secure and stable, and basically support economic development. And this economic development will encourage trade and investment in the region as well as with India and boost overall economic growth. One example being the projected Chabahar port in Iran, another being the Agartala Akhara railway project between India and Bangladesh. And it also helped to basically enhance strategic influence and strengthen soft power. The neighborhood first policy is well reflected in the present budget, with grants being set aside for neighboring countries. Bhutan, of course, is the most important because it is a buffer state with China. And here, in fact, it's tangible. It's always got a large amount. And this year, in this year's budget, the highest allocation went to Bhutan, that is 2068.56 crores, which is slightly less than last year's 2400 crores, but I'll explain this later. Nepal, another buffer state, was allocated 700 crores, up from 500 crores last year. Sri Lanka, strategically important, received 245 crores, which is 150 crores more than the previous financial year. The African countries collectively received 200 crores, which perhaps needs a little bit of rethinking because African countries showed great interest in India as a major player in the global south in last year's G20 summit. And also, if India wishes to remain significant in the African growth story, with China, Russia, the EU, the US, and even middle powers are interested in playing a role in African development, India has to basically boost up its well, uh, aid and grants. However, allocation in assistance to Bangladesh, which is also a key neighbor, decreased by 40% to rupees 120 crores. One reason for this is that several of the earlier projects, the Indian projects in Bangladesh, including the Agartala railway line, have been completed. Moreover, Bangladesh has become the largest recipient, and this is the other thing that I was talking about, of India's lines of credit with India, well, basically, to date, the LOCs to Bangladesh amounts to about 7.4 billion for sectors like railways, roads, shipping ports, defense. The shift in funding strategy from outright grants to low interest loans can be seen also not only in Bangladesh but also in Bhutan, where in fact LOCs have been given for hydroelectric projects. This marks a growing diplomatic alignment between the government and the private sector, whether to build transportation and energy infrastructure or to take India's digital public infrastructure abroad. This is reflected in India's regional connectivity strategy, for instance, in the BBIN, to develop energy grid and market with Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Perhaps because of this emerging strategy favoring preferential loans to outright grants and the involvement of the private sector, this year's budget saw an 8% reduction in the funds allocated under technical and economic cooperation with other countries. The third point is that the budget allocated to the MOD in financial year 24-25 is just rupees 400 crore more than that which was allocated in the interim budget, uh, that is in February. The capital allocated for the DRDO has been increased by 8% and border roads by 7.5%. In fact, the border roads organization got 6,500 crores, which is 30% higher than the 23-24 financial year and 60% higher than the 21-22 financial year. The allocation for sustenance.
Professor
Yes.
Bhattacharya, you could conclude your opening remarks.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I just have a little bit more, just a little bit more, one or two other points. What I want to say is that basically this is very important. And what is important is capital allocation for new technology, new innovations which are there in defense. The Coast Guard, for instance, okay, has been given a large sum of money for buying new crafts. But we have to see this from another point of view. The adequacy of the defense budget must not be assessed from the quantum of funds, but in terms of threat mitigation, capacity creation, and force modernization. And here is a caveat. Very often, 90% of the capital budget for the coming year is utilized to meet committed liabilities, that is, which were made earlier. And perhaps the same will happen this year, which means very little will be left for new innovation. And this brings me to two little issues which I want to point out. One for the MOD, the other for the ME. Basically, for the MOD, now there is a rapidly changing, right, as such ideas about war. And India is yet to take cognizance of concepts like limited war under nuclear overhang or the concept of non-contact or attritional war. Consequently, our force deployments are manpower intensive, enhancing huge expenditure on salaries, housing, upkeep, pensions, etc. Yet simultaneously, there is the issue of long borders with China and Pakistan, which need physical troop deployment. The issue is how to meld the archaic with the modern. There are now the newly created higher defense organizations, for instance, the Department of Military Affairs. It is hoped that they can well work out an optimal use of available resources for defense and defense capability enhancement, keeping in mind India's requirements, perhaps coming up with an India model. And the second issue that I wanted to talk about is basically India's ambition to become a leader of the global south, which is the Vishwa Bandhu. But the MEA itself has capacity constraints. The Indian Foreign Service remains understaffed with approximately about 1,000 officers, that is one of the smallest diplomatic services globally in relation to India's economy and population. This is too small, in fact, to oversee about 200 diplomatic missions abroad, as well as there are IFS officers in New Delhi and in IGOs, so basically to facilitate for policy coordination. Also, there are capacity gaps in the budget for MEA that may affect India's reputation if it cannot fulfill its commitments. MEA's firepower in terms of grants and loans is far less than that of its competitor China or several European countries, or even middle powers like Australia, Japan, or even Saudi Arabia. In order to cope with India's rising ambitions, the MEA will have to move beyond mere budget and funding issues to cooperation with other ministries and more. It will need to cooperate and coalesce with other ministries and experts to contribute to specialized negotiations on issues like climate diplomacy, diaspora diplomacy, technology partnerships, and emerging international forums. This year's budget is a start, but much more is needed, including innovative thinking, if India is to play its role as a major player in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya, for highlighting the aims of India in this budget to becoming a Viksit Bharat, Atmanirbharta, and also a friend of the world. So this is very interesting, and I would now like to invite Ambassador Anil Trigunaya ji for his remarks. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi and IMPRI for organizing this discussion and for inviting me. In fact, whatever I was to say, Professor Bhattacharya has said nearly everything. So there's nothing much that one can add. But from a practitioner's perspective, only thing I can say is money makes the mayor go. So the funding is always very much essential, whether we want to enhance the capacity, whether we want to enhance our footprint across the world, or be a leader of the global south, or for that matter, a Vishwabandhu or a Vishwaguru. So money today is directly proportional to your achievements. But I must give credit to my colleagues in the Foreign Service for doing an amazing job despite these constraints. And they have come out very well. So it's only not that the numbers are going to be making any great difference. It is the quality and the specialization that we require in the Foreign Service going forward. The classical type of diplomacy and the diplomats would no longer be able to deal with the kind of challenges that we are going to work. One of the suggestions that I gave to the ministry was that for some reason, we have been attracting a very large number of IITians and engineering and science graduates. Since techno-diplomacy is going to be one of the major areas going forward, I think that we will need to create a corpus of these people who are aware about science, technology, and everything to be the techno-diplomats in the countries where either we are trying to procure technologies or the countries where we are going to export our technologies or have technological collaborations. So this is something that is very important. And I'm happy to see that more budget and allocation has been done for think tanks, for the training and for capacity building within the Foreign Service. Now, in about 5 years' time, we have seen for the first time a 23% increase, which is a good thing. Of course, as was mentioned by Professor Bhattacharya, that there has been, of course, neighboring countries get the cake, and so they get almost everything. There is definitely a mindset change today that instead of grants, we should try to give more lines of credit. But let me tell you something. In Africa, where we give large number of lines of credits, the appetite for lines of credit is really reducing significantly because that adds to their debt. And then that is something that we'll have to find a way out. One of the good things that we have done, I think I saw somewhere in the budget discussions, that India has probably now working on providing not in US dollar terms, all these LOC or the grants or everything. It is being considered that we should try to designate them in the Indian rupees, because these are generally bilateral grants. So it is very important that we work on that. Then it was also mentioned that diplomacy today is not only conducted by diplomats alone. It is different kind of diplomacy. For example, we talked about climate diplomacy. Now, for the climate diplomacy, you need Ministry of Environment and other ministries, then Ministry of Energy for energy diplomacy. Then you require, now today we are trying to become a hub for education. So you would require to have greater collaborations in that sector as well. So that will be something that will be very important. Now, one thing which is very important, and that convergence needs to take place and must take place. And in your discussion, we are talking about defense and foreign ministry together. So I believe that the defense diplomacy means the diplomats and defense, there need to be certain kind of convergence. And that is good for both power projection and proper planning in a very, very volatile world. So I think that these are some of the very important things that are there. Secondly, like China, I think we'll also have to consider somewhere or the other, it may sound, I mean, I'm not a great one for giving LOCs and all lines of credit or grants free, but you have to be realistic in this world. There is a checkbook diplomacy that is playing out, irrespective which of our countries or our counterparts are there, who are our competitors as well for the influence, especially in the global south. And I think we'll have to match with that. And if we don't match with that, apart from gearing up our own delivery mechanisms, you see, we also lack in delivery mechanisms. We announce things, and then it takes a long time in dealing with that. And then most of the countries get really upset with it. They may not say so. That is there. Now, something, for example, Africa was mentioned. We have still in 8 years not been able to host India-Africa Forum Summit. I mean, that is a very major area for us, and we cannot just give it up. So it needs to be held quickly. And that is one area where we were able to convey to our African friends that we are here for you. In 2018, Prime Minister Modi was in Kampala, where he defined and designed India's Africa policy, that Africa for Africans, we are there for you. But they expect more, and they expect in real terms. Of course, there are a large number of projects. Another thing that I'm seeing is that instead of going on very gigantic projects, we are also looking at more high-impact community projects, developmental projects, which is a very good thing, because that should give a short timeline and should be able to provide immediate assistance to the people in a visible manner. That is what is very important. Cultural diplomacy, that is something we need to really focus on, and I hope that there is enough adequate provisions in that. Of course, we need to also, in my view, look at some of the things like Latin America, for example, is barely 30 crores. I mean, that is a geography that has been ignored for a long time. And if we are focusing on Africa, we need to focus on Latin America, then only we are going to reach there. And that if you look at just simply the BRI and its expense, we will realize that what happens there. Within our neighborhood, as has been clearly brought out from the discussions previously and the budget, that this will continue to be a how much can you give there? That is the thing. At the end of the day, how big is the check? And so with China, we are going to continue to have this kind of a competition that will continue. And I think we will need to be prepared for it. I'm talking because now I'm no longer a foreign service officer. So I'm just trying to talk publicly about the things that we need to really be careful. We talk ourselves to be as HADR, diaspora diplomacy is very important. But to take along, that is also becoming increasingly more difficult as the world becomes more volatile. Our investment in our diaspora needs to increase significantly. And I'm sure Mr. Ravindra Sachdev will speak about it as well. So I think that as a humanitarian disaster, this is another thing that the Ministry of External Affairs did. Last time we have done G20, and then this year, if we are able to do India-Africa Forum Summit, I think we would have plugged the gap. The Quad and all that are very much fine for strategic reasons, but for doing something that is very much required. Of course, MEA has its own capacity constraints. It has not been able to recruit. I remember from 2017 when we used to go to Parliament and everywhere else, everyone was in favor of a larger foreign service. Today, we have embassies where we have 1 or 2 diplomats, ambassador plus 1, and the rest are there. There is a possibility, not only within India, to get people from different ministries, which we are doing on deputation, but abroad, I have always committed, this is a small investment, but a much better, bigger return. That is to recruit well-qualified local staff in the missions, whether it is commercial section, cultural section, their outreach, their language capabilities, their access into the local system are always very, very useful. So I think that those are some of the things that needs to be done. And I think my 8 minutes are over, so I just stop. And I must say I'm happy to see that there has been at least a 23% increase in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Since you have to leave in a bit, I have two questions so that you could, if it is possible, you could respond to that. Talking about the African Union, India actually was, it led the introduction of the African Union into the G20 last year during its presidency, and in the budget it has allocated 200 crores for this for Africa as a continent. And how does this play out given the excessive investment and presence of China in the continent? And also about having we had a meeting with one of the ambassadors to India from Uruguay, and he was quite interested that the government should have an embassy or a consulate at least in the capital, because they are all operating through the Buenos Aires. So there are many other countries where we do not have, and yet they are very interested, and given the diasporic presence of Indians in those countries, do you think that we have the wherewithal to introduce such things? Thank you.
Well, I think that the government has must give credit to the government for expanding its footprints by way of opening new missions. In Africa, we have opened 18 missions in different countries. I remember when I was posted in Africa, we used to cover 5 or 10 countries at one time. And sometimes in your 3 years, you are not able to visit one. But today, that thing has changed. But my grip with that is that it is important that whenever we, in Africa especially, in the countries that we consider difficult stations, we must post good level, high level diplomats. And internally, we must find some way whereby you should tell them that, okay, after doing this posting, you go there, like we used to do in Afghanistan and all that. So difficult stations. So if you consider that, like all of the foreign services do. Secondly, as I said, that it is important that we must open more missions. But the missions, unless they are open in a proper manner, that is something that you don't have adequate staff to fund that. And that is the problem that we are facing at the headquarters. In fact, if I were to say that our headquarters is rather weak compared to many other countries. So the specialization is sometimes missing. The officers are so overburdened with different kinds of things and outreach and whatnot that it becomes difficult to really do the kind of thing. Though tremendous credit to them, I must see, and I've been through it, and I know what it takes. But Africa, you mentioned, so I'm sure that wherever we have adequate interests, economic interests, it is possible. But one more thing I want to tell you is another important and cheaper option and very effective option, and I can tell you from my own experience, is to have honorary consuls. Those who are good businessmen, well-connected politically, open the embassies. I mean, these people, they have their own house. You have no establishment expenditure at all. So we must start with the honorary consuls, and some of them are absolutely fabulous. They can get you with meetings with the leaders of the countries in 5 minutes, whereas through foreign ministry, you cannot get in 3 months. So I think that is a good option there. Africa, of course, we will have to, I think, work on something with them. They want us because like our real neighbors who are just South Asian neighbors or the West Asian neighbors or others, most of the countries want to see some kind of a balancing act between China and India, not one way or the other. Very few countries you will find who are looking at just going one way. Most of them want India to be up and about and be present there, and be present significantly, not just by opening a small embassy and just keep sitting there. That's no. It is important that we are engaged in the projects. Secondly, whatever we commit during Prime Minister's visit, Minister's visit, whatever we say, that is something that needs to be delivered in a time-bound manner. Of course, it's not only our fault, it is the fault of the host governments also, because very often they are not able to provide adequate support or information or manpower to do the complete projects. I have seen with Pan-Africa e-network project what kind of challenges we faced. So this is also very important. But at the same time, when they come, secondly, we must have a review, constant review mechanism, both with the ambassadors of those countries here, our ambassadors there. And today, fortunately, like we are doing the Zoom, you can always have a Zoom meeting and get an assessment of where are the problems. And openly we need to do. For Africa, at the VIF, we have just done a report which we have submitted to the government with about 83 recommendations. Now, if they were to look at something like that, they will feel that this is something which can be useful. So whatever is useful, take it along and go forward. But this is a real hard, real world. Goodwill is there, but goodwill has its own limits. You need to capitalize on the goodwill while it lasts.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Mr. Robinder Sachdev for his presentation. Mr.
Hi.
Sachdev?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with you and an honor. Thank you, Dr. Simi and Dr. Arjun and eminent panelists. It's such a brilliant collection of minds that we learn. And this is a subject, I think, which is of interest to everyone, all of us here. So we kind of dive in. What I've done, I've just made a simple presentation with some points overall, right? I'm assuming, and of course, as has been brought out, also the numbers are well known. I mean, I think everyone out here and even those in the audience have gone through the numbers, have a rough idea. So I've kind of tried to take a slightly different tack on that. So please, next ahead. Thank you, Simi. Okay, so in this outline, I'm kind of putting it out 7 slides and a couple of remarks I have otherwise. Good news, bad news. Why no wars in the near future? Budgetary lessons from the wars of today. Comments on defense budget and on the NEA budget. Next, please. The good news in a way, if we were to see, I remember reading several years ago, sometime a column by someone here in India, I think one of the good minds. And his point was that, why is India not investing heavily into its defense? And the logic therein was that we do not anticipate wars. Is that so? I don't know. But to me, it kind of looks, it seems, if we were thinking our strategic, leaderships, that yes, there is a war imminent sometime soon, 1 year, 2 year kind of a thing, then I think we would be. I mean, that's an assumption I'm making. And of course, the brilliant minds on this panels could, reflect and, elucidate and educate me. But the question is that a mindset in our leadership? Okay. So we do not anticipate a war in the near future. I'll come to that in a minute. The bad news is that, yes, as everyone has been saying that, we are not preparing our military industrial technology complex fast enough for the 2030s on the defense side. And on the foreign ministry side, I think brilliant points have been made by Professor Bhattacharya and Ambassador Trigunayat, that the basic point is crunch, money crunch. Let's be, simple words, money crunch. So whatever it be, next slide, please. So in the good news, when I say, or when I throw this thesis or a thought out, you see, if we look back over the last 10 years of our defense budget as a percentage of our GDP, it has been decreasing. It has been decreasing from 2015, let's say a 10-year period I just took overall, right? And this is, by the way, generated through AI. So maybe if I'm wrong, but I cross-checked it with 2 different AI models. So I think this is the correct number, perhaps. So our defense budget is decreasing as a percentage of the GDP. However, yes, there is a caveat. It could be said that, our economy is increasing, right? So 1% of 1% of 100 is only 1, but a 1% of 200 is 2, right? So therefore, yes, our budget in numbers has been going up, but as a percentage of our GDP, it has been going down. So then does it indicate a strategic mindset that, of course, we are ready? I would absolutely understand and think and believe in that. All our, forces and all our, key sovereign elements are ready for a war any time. But does it mean we think that the scenarios will not pan out into a war in the coming years soon? And secondly, of course, as I think has been said here also, a lot of army folks are saying is that the budget should be about 2.2% of the GDP. Generally, I mean, as of now, it should be, but whereas it's about 1.8 and 1.9%. So both of these things combined can lead one to think this big question, are we not expecting, anticipating, gaming for a war, and no war is imminent? So that's good news in a way also. Next, please. Now, secondly, I drew some lessons from the wars of today which are going on, let's say Ukraine and Israel. Regarding Israel, it was pretty interesting to see. Israel has an annual defense budget of about $23-24 billion, and America gives it every year. This decade, every decade it's keeping on. It gives it about $3.8 or so billion. So Israel has an annual defense budget of about $27 odd billion, right? And Israel is definitely a smart military power and advanced economy. Within days of the Gaza war, Israel approached the USA for a $15 billion aid package. Now, what does that mean? Of course, many plannings have been done. Everything has been done. They have inventories for, a month or whatever, the weapons and all. So does it mean that if a war breaks out, and $15 billion is about more than 50% of their annual budget? So does it mean that the minute a war breaks out, a country I should have in my back pocket, a reserve of 50% of my defense budget, which I can pull out immediately without disrupting my other economy overall? So if our budget is $75 billion, then the day the war breaks out, we need at least $35 to $40 billion immediately lined up. That's from the Israel example, if I were to, take away. The Russia-Ukraine war. Russia's annual budget, of course, has been going up over the last few years, and it's majorly a defense-oriented economy now. But Russia's defense budget this year is, I think, $155 or $160 billion, right? Now, we do not know exactly, and the numbers are not known for sure, but how much. But it is estimated by some good estimates that Russia's quote-unquote military spending in the war in 23 last year was $140 billion. So again, I'm trying to relate it to the budgets, the kind of money we allocate to our defense budget in a sense, right? So if Russia's defense budget annual is $160 billion, and within a year, and in 1 year of the war, it has spent $140 billion, approximately the same amount. So does it mean that when you go into a war, okay, a big war, then about the equivalent of your defense annual budget, which was routinely, you will be spending in that war? These are some questions to think about, I think, which of course are, strategic thinkers and planners of the budgets must be doing. But these are two, two aspects which come up as we look at defense spendings and expenditures incurred by countries when they're just starting a war or when they are in a big war. Next, please. Now, on the defense budget, yeah, everything is known and all, but I just thought to, kind of make a footnote. The budget is around whatever it is. Apart from the budget, there's an overlap of discussions, as I think Professor Bhattacharya was mentioning, many things are interlinked within the ecosystem or holistic view, and Ambassador Trigunayat also said. So there is this allocation of a corpus of a 1 lakh crore for an innovation initiative, okay, which is said to be a corpus for, startup ecosystem, especially for the deep tech, which especially the defense, military, MIC, etc. would need. But the point is that this 1 lakh crore is not allocated to the defense side, right? The defense budget is whatever it is, 621,000 some 100 crores, right? So if this corpus of 100,000 crores is set out there, now firstly, I don't know yet, or maybe it has been defined as to how long would this corpus last for, right? And it's not going to be, put together every once in a while. Maybe I'm assuming it's a corpus the government says over 5 years, we will create this corpus and spend this corpus. I'm assuming that. So assuming that means around 20,000 crore per year from this corpus, which will be assembled, aggregated. 20,000 crore would be spent on the innovation initiative across various industries. Now I'm assuming that, let's say, about 25% of these monies go into the kind of technologies and startups which are of the defense sector, right? They could be deep tech, could be for fintech also, or many other areas, right? You can even say cyber security, that also is security in some senses, right? But I'm assuming the traditional sense or the modern sense of defense. So about 25% of this 20,000 crores could go into the deep tech development. So that means around 5,000 crores. So perhaps there is a bonus or an additional 5,000 crores if we look holistically into the defense budget in addition to 621,000 crores. Thank you. Next, please. And of course, on the defense budget, yeah, we do see that, the long-term planning, the picture of, especially the second one, the joint integration, where the capital budget has been consolidated under single head of defense services rather than separate allocations for air, army, air force. In fact, there should be a space force also, by the way, or is it the works, whatever it be. So under a joint defense services account, so that obviously, builds up synergies across within the machinery, I would say. Next, please. On the MEA budget, yes, we've been discussing, one thing struck out, and I think Ambassador Trigonayat mentioned about the Global South and Africa, and also Professor Bhattacharya. You see, if I look at the assistance numbers which are there, Bhutan, Nepal, etc., Africa, my question is, where is the Global South? Okay, on the one hand, we could say that many of these countries are Global South, right? Or many or most of them, right? But, and of course, in Africa, which again is a very teeny-weeny amount, what is 200 crores, but still, okay, is there. To my mind, Global South could also, I think it was mentioned, Latin America, maybe a country. And especially, why not a country or one of the islands of the Pacific region or the Pacific Islands, 10, 15, 20, which are there, who collectively, in fact, when India hosted a meeting there, or India, US were hosting, and I think Biden could not make it, right? And those 14 countries together formally asked India to take leadership of the Global South and of their countries. So maybe, and it has other geopolitical aspects also. This whole South China Sea is area of contest. We need to build up. We are building up. We are doing a lot in these islands, definitely. But it would have been interesting, I think, if one of the, islands were also included in these monies which are mentioned, and let's say a country in Latin America. Next, please. Sure, and this has been covered, the Chabar port, yeah, sure, but, in today, 100 crore, fair enough and good, it needs much more money than that, I would say, but fair enough, it's there, it's building up, etc. The other thing which I found good and interesting was the Global Trade Promotion Body for MSME industries that would be set up, people-to-people linkages, trade promotion, all of that, it requires a chamber, a network, or an association of sorts, like your CIIs, ASSOCHAMs of the PhD chambers are doing. For the MSc industry right now, there is none such, sophisticated chamber. So if there is some money put in properly, that would definitely help assist our economic linkages as well as our, other linkages with the countries where this MSME chamber focuses. I would suggest maybe why not Global South? Let's make it robust. There's a lot of technology transfer we can do, diffusion of innovations between India and the countries of the Global South, which partly is happening through the iTech programs, but a lot more has to be done, and a lot more on, business and business and business models need to be done. Next, please. Okay, now, listening to the discussions which are going on, I made a couple of points which I should have, or anyway, which came up. One point to my mind, I think someone mentioned, was about defense exports. I think we urgently, critically need defense exports. Not only for earning the money. The point is, we have a problem. The problem we have is that if private sector produces, or even a public sector, corporatized, produces any product, missile, defense, avionics, whatever, there is only one buyer, the government of India. If the government of India doesn't buy from you, let's say you've done product development of some, excellent technology or whatever, etc. You spent money in the, in the pilot prototype R&D development of that product. The government of India says, no, sorry, what are you to do? You're sunk. One of the reasons why America's defense industry has expanded so well, done so well, is because they've been selling to multiple governments across the world. The Lockheed Martins or and the Boeings and the Northrop Grumman's do not depend only upon US contracts. Yeah, definitely they do. That's huge gravy money. But they're going out and selling in other countries. Some of their platforms may succeed in, may not succeed. Some may sell in US, some may not sell in US, etc. So they got a more than one buyer. So the biggest one, I think this is a structural problem in the defense industry worldwide overall, but let's say much more so in India. Okay, that we have only one buyer. So therefore, promotion of defense exports should be taken critically, is being taken, no doubt, but not only from the point of view that it helps our export numbers, it helps our geopolitical strategic linkages with those to whom we sell, brings us closer to them, but also for the very fundamental reason that it helps us to create and grow and widen our industrial technology military base. That is one. Second is, before coming to the foreign affairs thing, okay, now it's only foreign affairs, maybe. Okay. Now, definitely, yes, there was this talk about MEA to be inviting, FDI and partnerships and all. Definitely, yes, it's the age of economic diplomacy. And I think all of us have said and has been repeated that there's a shortage of resources within the MEA with whatever our aspirations, our needs are. But the MEA has to be playing increasingly a role, I would say, a parallel to the METI of Japan, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry of Japan. They play a very savvy role. They go out in world markets, countries, they make all strategic research, they find out the right players, they do the right due diligence, who are the good businessmen in this country, what are their political equations and all. They do all that groundwork, heavy research. And then they come back to their headquarters, and then they call some of their top Japanese companies. They figure out which company's culture will fit best with which company's culture. And then tell them, guys, you know what, now we've made this all preparations, you go and talk, etc. Our MEA has to play that kind of a role. I mean, that's an ideal scenario, I'm saying, but that is what is needed. And of course, in this, as has been said, all elements, whatever we may call of diplomacy, economic diplomacy, technology sourcing, we should have roving ambassadors going out, seeking out technology, minerals. I think Professor Bhattacharya mentioned rare earth and all, scouring, scooping out deals and getting deals back to India. Education diplomacy, whatever it may be. And of course, diaspora diplomacy and all, to which, all of us, I think many of us on this panel are very much involved. Diaspora and public diplomacy, a lot more has to be done, should be done. But of course, it also needs money. So we don't see that in the budgets, but I think everybody realizes cultural diplomacy is hugely important. So we are seeing it happening, but it needs a quantum shift, I think, for us to, navigate this world. The world of today is actually, it's said that it's a new world order new world order now we are living in. I beg to say it's not a new world order. Order means things are defined. It's a new world matrix, which is under construction. This matrix, it's a matrix now, under construction. Quickly, last one point and I'm done. MEA staffing and gone. This point of honorary consults by Ambassador Trigonath was awesome, fantastic. That because you see, there are people all across the world in many countries, good businessmen, effective, influential businessmen who want to, get also a diplomatic status. It helps them, getting a diplomatic car kind of a thing, that CD plate, all of that plays into that. But they can be very, very useful agencies or agents for quote unquote agents in a positive sense or whichever sense for India's expansion. And lastly, regarding African Union, Simi, your question that 200 crores in budget, how can we do? I think, here what we could do, see, we don't have the money. Simple. But we have something else, a bunch of other things. What we could do is we should combine with Japan. Japan has deep pockets and they have structured system. There's JBIC, JICA, etc., JETRO, they're very organized. Okay. India should partner up with Japan. The groundwork India could do in the African countries, figure out, plan out, just as I was saying, the METI projects, plan out a metro, a rail project, a power project, where can it be, set up properly, do all of that. Because the Japanese are very, they cannot handle much uncertainty. Okay, we can. So we can go into these countries, figure out, package the deals, work out the kinks and kooks, etc. And the partnership should be that India will do the due diligence or bring up the right partners potentially. India can also supply the labor, the workforce, the skill. And Japan, you bring in the money. And between the two of us, it is in our geopolitical interests also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, Mr. Rabinder Sachdev. You have really highlighted one thing that really took me was the Space Force. Why not India join that elite group of with the United States? And do we really have that capacity to have it in the next few years, I would say? And also about the cultural ambassadors and how we are, also about instituting fellowships and to various countries in the world, how we are actually having our demographic dividend go out and also play around with the culture, with the diaspora, and also bring a good name to the country. That is also very important. And thank you very much for highlighting all these very, very important aspects. I would now and also you also mentioned that the limited defense budget is because we are not anticipating any war. So this is a very good point to actually segue into Major General PK Chakravorty, who I would like to take, whom I would like that he takes up this aspect as well, and also about Agniveer. How does the absorption of the Agniveers reflect into the budget? In your remarks, if you could incorporate these two aspects as well. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Sachdev.
Thank you.
Major General, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Simi. And I must thank IMPRI for really getting me onto this very beautiful discussion. We had the interim budget, and I'm very happy Professor Swaran Singh will be speaking after me, and I know what the line possibly is going to take. Now, it's really a fight between two things when we talk of budgeting. One is guns, and the other is bread and butter. And in between, you have so much. I remember, when Mr. Chidambaram once came to IDSA, and he was the finance minister. He says, on one hand, I've got nuclear weapons, and on the other hand, I've got toilets. This is before the budget. And he says, it's really your jugglery of what you do. So I'll only say a few questions, which I'll be very pointed because I won't get into figures. The first point is whether you need war or is not in my hands or your hands or anyone else who is sitting on the panel. Let me put it. I'll just say very humbly, India has fought 4 wars. We are still having a mirror deployment. Mirror deployment in Eastern Ladakh, that against the Chinese. We are having a lot of terrorist incidents taking place. People are dying. And so therefore, I really would not get into what the Clausewitz defined because we will be totally digressing. Next, you have the Ukraine, whatever Russia calls the special operations. And you have had today Israel, which is supposed to be the world class in intelligence along with the United States, being surprised by Hamas in conjunction with Iran. I would only caution that as a country, I think one should never think of such an eventuality. And I go back to Kautalya, Professor Swaran Singh. I mean, just since I had to research with the Arthashastra also, this is a task which really a military man does. I think he said that never think like this. So I would request the panelists, please don't think of this option. He, as a matter of fact, I'll remind you what George Washington says. That nation is strong, which is always prepared for war. we'll start with that presumption. And the next issue which I would like to say is about budgeting. You may say anything. I would put it very clearly. As a soldier, we have no options but to accept whatever the government gives us. And we will live with it. And we will still do our task. How do we do it? I had used two words before also. We have to prioritize and we have to innovate. I can go into the details of prioritization, which we are doing, and what is it we don't do, and innovation also, which we do. Agniveer is possibly, I will not touch on the subject, is one such innovation. It is a prioritization, all right, of having what the Prime Minister said, a young army, to having, and when we introduce something like you have said, Agniveer, it is something which is right now being introduced. Let's give it a chance and let's see how it happens. While I was watching your show, I just got a WhatsApp of the Air Force 25, I think, Air Force Agniveers who are today doing drill, and they are possibly mastering drill also, despite being Agniveers. So all that I would say is, it's a scheme, and once they leave, we are very happy to notice that people are going to take them. They have come out openly, even with percentages. So we'll leave it at that. But I must come on back to the main subject, which is the defense budget. Now, needless to say, China, they say, Professor said it's 231 billion. This is what is stated budget. Believe me, it is much more than 300 to 350 billion. Pakistan, 10 billion, much more. Israel, I mean, say, we brought out the figures. Believe me or not, I've been to Israel, interacted with them. They will get the moon if they ask for it. How do you expect otherwise? The population of Israel, please let me tell you, is about 96 lakhs. It is less than a crore. They are fighting today the following, please note. They are fighting firstly the Gaza, then you got the West Bank, then you got Lebanon with the Hezbollah is there, and Iran. These are actually taking place. So when you are dealing with all these things and you are able to do it, you need budgeting from somewhere. And certainly, all that I would say is that without a budget, we cannot discount the threats we have. Now, an army works on threats, and as I brought out, that these threats are real. We have a threat from our northern neighbor. We have a threat from a western neighbor. We have got a lot of counterinsurgency issues. Ambassador spoke of HADR. We get involved in HADR also. Now, a point which I would like to say about the basic budget is the pensions. Right in the beginning, we were given a chart in which the pensions were shown. And when the pensions were shown, it was shown that they occupy a sizable part. It's a recommendation from me that if we can delink the pensions from the defense budget. After all, today I am a pensioner. I have got nothing. Even my hospital is, I am following something like a ECHS scheme. I am paid by today defense accounts, which is again a part of the finance ministry. Why burden today the armed forces with this? This money should be a separate component of the budget. This is because it's a major issue. It will help also in the armed forces focusing on the right things. The next thing I want to talk about is weaponization and definitely indigenization, spoken of so much. But believe me, it takes some time to do one thing, and that is you have technology, you need it, but to absorb that technology, it really requires a lot of effort. And if that be the case, we cannot do purely by indigenization. It has to be a combination of some items coming from abroad. Maybe we have to buy them. Then only possibly the technology would come. And then we developing the rest. To start from scratch is a tall order. We are seeing even in the case of the Tejas, the Air Force is today just down to about 30 to 32 squadrons. Requirement is 42 to 45. It's great. The Navy is in the similar state. Army, the state of obsolescence of the equipment is well known. Still, we carry on. I often said that we have a rifle which we today is supposed to last, let's say, X number of years. We make sure that this goes to X squared. If required, it goes to X cubed. Now, that is the way we are now continuing and will continue because that is what we can get. Now, the point at issue is who can help us? People spoke of the DRDO. Now, DRDO by itself, having worked with it, is an excellent organization, but it has a culture where the private industry, if it enters it, the best is a PPP. That is, you have the private sector, you have the public sector, and together they produce. I'm very happy that the PSUs, the government has done a lot, has been today totally, corporatized, and they are really doing a good role. And the next issue which I want to bring about is if you today make this DRDO, give more and more to the private sector. People will say we're giving a lot. Believe me or not, it's still not a level playing field. This is the truth. The more you give to the private sector, the more you'll see us improving. And the next word is exports. I fully agree with everybody, and I want to tell you about exports. Let's say today, we are exporting the BrahMos, which has got about $450 million. Another equipment which I was personally involved in, the Pinaka. Armenia has bought the Pinaka. And so also many other equipments are likely to be sold. Now this ensures that we are able to deal with this issue in a big way. Undoubtedly, let me tell you, it's nothing new that we also know that the Indian Army or the Indian Navy or the Indian Air Force or the Coast Guard can't buy everything manufactured in India. When we go to the private sector, they always ask us, what will happen if in future, once your orders are over? And we work towards that end. And that's how BrahMos is being exported. That's how Pinaka is being exported. And we have reached, as you have correctly brought out, about $2.63 billion. Believe me, if the private sector has given much more into the defense production, and we encourage the startups, which we are already doing. I visited some of the startups, and we are able to get in. We should be able to increase these exports further. Now, when we give defense exports 2.63 billion, then this should be counted also against our defense budget, because we are considered that we are doing everything. Believe me or not, after all, it's coming to the government. So the government should take this factor into account. Nothing will be exported unless the Indian Armed Forces says that an equipment is good. It is very difficult for a foreign armed force to accept an equipment unless that own armed force says so. We are not the United States where Lockheed Martin can go exclusively and sell to some country. It's not practicable. So therefore, this should be taken into account. The next thing which I would like to take into account is the force deployment. The professor madam brought out that we should think of having less manpower on the borders. Believe me, we are having very little manpower on the borders. It's something which I can just possibly simplistically state. Today, if you look, we removed manpower which was involved in counter-terrorist operations in Jammu and Kashmir and put them on the Chinese border. I'm just saying this as a reaction to Galwan. Now, in the same areas where they were removed, you're having the Jammu region today up with terrorist activity. So manpower cannot be substituted. Believe me, I've commanded a brigade of drones. I understand what artificial intelligence is, but the human being is needed to counter activities when they happen on ground. Well, today we are having a multi-domain warfare. Well, let's see it. Has Russia reduced its manpower? Has the United States reduced its manpower? China reduced. China's reduction is a very, very, one has to look at it deeply and realize that they have actually increased. So manpower on your borders, my advice to you all, please do not think of this because you're thinking of pensions, you're thinking dealing pensions. pension seems to be a major issue with finance people. So delink it, make it a separate issue. After all, you have even created Agniveer, where today you are not going to give them pension. So if you look at it, this issue must be looked at manpower in a very, very distinct. We have to operate missiles. We are going to operate drones. Even for drones, you need manpower. Let's say today we decide that, okay, 30% of the aircrafts will be unmanned. Even if 30% of the aircraft get unmanned, still we are having just 30 squadrons. Imagine when we go to 42 to 45 squadrons. Are you going to today have those squadrons totally without pilots? So next, ratio of pilot to an aircraft. If you take our ratio, which represents approximately 1 to a little more than 1. If you take the United States, they have about 2 pilots per aircraft because they cater for that. And how much can a pilot fly at one time? I mean, so the papers are out that civilian pilots should not fly. How much can you put a pilot during war on duty? So when we look at manpower, please let's not come out with purely academic solutions. As a practitioner and as a person who has also done his academics reasonably well, I can say that today one needs to be pragmatic when one deals with manpower. The last point which I would like to say is that it was brought out that during war, you definitely need much more. It is to avoid contingencies like what Israel is doing or what today Ukraine is undergoing that we ask for defense budgets which allow us to have adequate reserves so that when we fight a war, we do not have to land in a situation. One can see India has fought a war in 48, India has fought a war in 62, 65, 71, and so many conflicts. Definitely in 62, we were in such a case. But if you take all of the wars, we had catered for the threat, and because we had catered, we were able to do it. So I would like to just end at this point that undoubtedly we have to do a lot. And we have to depend on a lot of, let us say, I'll say, good intentions from the government as to what we are doing and from the civilian public. Believe me, the armed forces stand as the last resort for any calamity, whether it's operational, whether it's natural. So therefore, if they are not there, I leave it to you how you would be able to deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Major General, for highlighting these crucial aspects. And I would like to invite Professor Swaran Singh for his remarks, and would also like to, apart from his prepared remarks, if so, because India is a signatory to the United Nations and a firm advocate of world peace. Since you have been my teacher in JNU and you have taught me peace and conflict resolution, so I would like you to throw some light on the budget and peace and conflict resolution. What are the prospects? Are we really ready for peace by allocating 6.22 lakh crore in the defense sector? Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simi. It's a delight. I've been listening to all the speakers so far. Excellent remarks, one after another. And I'm happy you put a certain preface to where India wants to be. A budget in that sense is largely an expression of intent. Budget showcases the vision where leadership of the country wants to take that country. I think in that sense, budget has to be viewed way beyond the figures that it gives. It also sends far more other interesting underlying messages. One simple message that we should keep in mind is that budget outlays always have budget estimates in the end. So invariably, it should be our caution to compare this year's budget outlays with last year's budget outlays. and not with last year's budget estimates. In most of the heads, budget estimates increase. Some of them increase substantially. Very rarely, I think very rarely, some heads, the budget estimates will be lower than budget outlays. So that's point number one. Budget that is now being given to us. In most sectors, this will increase before the year comes to, before the financial year comes to an end. Second, it's a cohesive collective budget. It's the union budget of Government of India. And even when you have separate heads, separate ministries, separate allocations made, their work is always complementary, sometimes overlaps. So for instance, when we are talking about nearly 22,000 crores budget of Ministry of External Affairs, that's only for the Ministry of External Affairs. But it's not only Ministry of External Affairs that runs foreign policy. Prime Minister's office runs foreign policy. National Security Advisor runs foreign policy. Your Commerce Ministry runs foreign policy. Your Sports Ministry runs foreign policy. Your think tanks run foreign policy. Your universities run foreign policy. Your city administrations run foreign policy too. So, job of Ministry of External Affairs is to create a broad bandwidth within which the vision of India's foreign policy has to be explained and explicated for other stakeholders. So 22,000 crores is not the only money that is going into how foreign policy will be enacted or how effective the foreign policy will be. Then, of course, one should also be careful. Often when we are talking of major powers, we are talking in terms of dollars. But then there is also something called purchasing power parity. What rupee can buy in India is going to be very different if you simply look at it in terms of dollars. Now, of course, to some extent, foreign procurements will be in dollars, but that is also a nuance as to rupees can buy much more. And in each nation, the level of agility, the level of training, the level of commitment of the personnel, including in armed forces and in Ministry of External Affairs, is also going to be at variance. Linguistic skills of people in Ministry of External Affairs are going to be very different. India being an English-speaking country adds to foreign policy or diplomacy in major ways. So again, figures are only indicator of where we want to go, but they do not necessarily define our leverages as to what exactly we will be able to achieve. And then, of course, as our leaders have said repeatedly, there are a lot of intangibles. How your foreign minister behaves, articulates, how your prime minister engages with the world, and whole lot of other credentials of India being a democracy, India being largest population country, etc., etc. There are so many intangibles that also beef up India's efforts and efficacy as to where this budget will take us. So that's a preface to what I'm going to speak as to why budget figures should be taken with a lot of caution and primarily should be seen in terms of intent, whereas the leverages that the budget will create, the efficacy and outcomes that will flow from here are going to be far away, far different in different cases of countries, including India. So let's keep in mind those other variables, those other intangibles, where India again is seen as a major flag bearer of peace, as Simi wanted me to underline, and of course a country that have stood by principles, normative foreign policy, etc. Now, let's talk about the brass tacks. India's budget was presented, and what it wants to do was clearly outlined by a very articulate foreign minister in his ex-comment, saying that the priority of Ministry of External Affairs is going to be in that hierarchical order: neighborhood, Act East, Global South, and Indians traveling abroad. I think we have known that neighborhood, a great detail of discussion has already taken place about figures that are being assigned to connect with the neighborhood, etc. Look East is another celebrated part of India's foreign policy. India is trying lately to engage with the Global South, and I think 2 Global South summit meetings last year and African Union coming into G20 was a major kind of a major achievement of India in that sense. I think this adding on Indians traveling abroad is a very interesting component of where the money is going to be spent. One can think of 1992 Gulf War I. India brought back Indian citizens from Middle East, but that was in a major crisis of economy. All of you remember how Sushma Swaraj started a whole new campaign where individual Indian citizens, not en masse Indians in crisis, but individual Indian citizens in distress around the world became concern of Ministry of External Affairs. And that, I think, is a very significant expression of intent to bring a certain pride among Indians who are living around the world. And that is in continuation of that mindset that we have seen that when Prime Minister went to Moscow, he took up issues of Indians in the Russian armed forces who needed to be brought out of that difficult scenario. Recently, Foreign Minister was in Vientiane. Discussions happened with Thailand, with Laos, about 100+ Indians who've been scammed into cyber scams of certain kind. They need to, so there are very specific focus on Indian citizens. So some of that budget, other than neighborhood, is going to go into taking care of Indian citizens. I think that's a very good development in where the MEA wants to use its money. Now, third, a very significant point, which also was discussed repeatedly, how India wants to emerge as an aid provider country. We are called lately for about 10 years now net security provider in the region. We are also now being noticed as a country that is providing aid. Mention of lines of credit was made. That has also become much more effective tool lately. I think we have over $30 billion of lines of credit in various countries. Then, of course, MEA is outlining about $2.2 billion of aid. So put together about $32 billion of aid and assistance. Now, if India has to be Viksit Bharat, India has to be world power and one among the 3 top nations, at least in terms of economic power, this is still peanuts compared to where major powers that are influencing global narratives. Agenda setting and narrative setting is a very important part of whether you want to build peace and stability or you want to build partners for prosperity. United States, for example, has a total assistance, aid and assistance, which goes beyond $1 trillion. And I just mentioned $32 billion of India. In fact, there are about 8-9 other countries, all small countries of Nordic countries, all of them more than $500 billion of foreign. And so MEA has to focus that if MEA wants to push India into one of the great powers of 21st century, then that aid and assistance driven partnerships will have to be as much part and parcel as we want to build our technology transfers related or co-production related partnership with other countries. So I think that is very significant. Now, let me move very clearly, quickly to Ministry of Defense, which is, I think, another very interesting discussion has taken place so far. We have heard a whole lot of commentaries on this. Again, defense budget, same thing applies. Does not tell whole story of what can be achieved. But let me first flag a couple of things that I notice to me are seen as areas flagged in terms of intent where Government of India wants to go. Very clearly, the most important area one notices is the focus on Atmanirbhar Bharat. We have seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years, about 800 items have been earmarked that will not be procured from abroad, will be produced locally. So we notice that the different reports are talking of 61% to 70% of the procurement budget is meant for procurements from within the country. Of course, you want to make that local production far more competitive. And I like the way General Chaudhary mentioned you should openly also promote exports. which is also being done interestingly, because last year, you would remember, Prime Minister had given a target of $1.5 billion for India's defense exports. So India's defense exports definitely are becoming a priority. How successful we are compared to United States exporting about 25% of the global exports of defense equipment. India will take time. It takes time for credibility to be built in other countries. It takes time to fine-tune processes, etc. But along with self-reliance, which is a major focus of this government and this budget, I think exports has also been a major focus of this budget. Second, I heard General Chakravorty mention about defense pensions. Bulk of your budget here, 6.2 lakh crore and 1.4 lakh crore is meant for defense budgets, which does not add to the punch of Indian Armed Forces. Sorry to say. But I also remember that I think from early 91, 92, defense pensions actually were separated once upon a time from defense budget. I think at some stage later, they were brought back into the defense budget. But I agree that defense pensions should be part of the, other Ministry of Personnel, for example, should look at that part of the budget. And defense budget, which normally gives an impression of the punch of the country in terms of dealing with adversaries, should not have pensions in it. But, thanks to pensions, the reverse argument I'm making also is interesting. Thanks to pensions, that India's defense budget looks about $75 billion. If you remove pensions, then this budget really looks really tiny. And that also has impression on perception management, how the world, how adversaries look at how much money is being allocated to defense budget is also interesting. In fact, if you look at now the top 10 defense spenders in the country, even when defense pensions are part of defense budget, India is very likely this year to become 5th largest. We were till recently 3rd largest defense spender country after United States and China. Because of Ukraine war, Russia is now, of course, the 3rd largest. Saudi Arabia is just, is about to scrape ahead of India if it continues to put money in huge defense imports, etc. So that also has perception in terms of India's punch as to whether India is seen as 3rd largest defense spender as we were till recently, or we are seen as the 5th largest defense spender while being world's largest population country. I mean, defense budget is supposed to protect these manpower, these citizens of India. And if we have largest population of the country and we have the 5th largest budget for defense, now this kind of creates a certain perception. I think that has to be looked upon. India has also this time focused much more the focus of this budget on veteran care. I think this ruling party has seen veterans as a very important constituency of ex-servicemen, for example, and about 48% increase in the budget for what is called ex-servicemen contributory health scheme, which I think is important because India is now will have much more aging population, and people who retired from armed forces are usually healthier, fitter, and more nationally dedicated, and integrity, etc., is better. So India has to focus on our elder citizens, growing senior citizens, because that number is going to increase. I sometimes say that a generation that faced India's opening up and reforms from 1990s and went out to make much more money than their earlier generations had made, that generation is now retiring with good health, good money, with a lot of skill sets, and that population has to be catered. And I think that clearly this part of the budget with 48% increase is looking at taking care of veterans of Indian Armed Forces. Focus on frontier infrastructure. I think this whole tension with China has brought that also into enormous focus. So defense budget has now about 30% increase this year for border roads organization, so that we can create better infrastructure. And I always say better infrastructure in frontier areas, of course, helps mobility of armed forces. It also makes life of people in those frontier areas also easier, who we otherwise call them remote areas. They are not remote areas, they are frontier areas. And we need to take care of those, particularly when China is building about 700 villages on the frontier areas. I think that again is a very interesting priority that we notice is happening. And final point, I think that number one issue that is highlighted about what this budget wants to do across all sectors is the mention of job creation. Job creation through skill development, through education, through innovation, increase in productivity, etc. And from that perspective, you notice the 22,000 crore budget of MEA is meant for about 5,000 people, of which about nearly 1,000 IFS officers. But Indian armed forces are about 1.4 million people. So that equation also have to be understood as to how many people are going to be utilizing that budget. And my last point, and I think I'm almost dragging this forcefully because I come from academia, compared to MEA's budget of 22 crores for, as I said, 5,000 people. Then, of course, MOD budget of 6.2 lakh crore for 1.4 million people. Budget on education is about 1.4 lakh crore. And how much education sector employs? 10 times compared to armed forces. And I'm only talking of teachers. I'm not talking of staff. I'm not talking of students. I'm not talking of other auxiliary people who draw money out of education sector. So when India, as the largest democracy, wants to allocate resources, it has to be extremely careful in dividing the pie. And in that sense, education sector also helps both in foreign policy and in defense. And mention was made in the beginning of peace research, peace education. And I think there is a need for us to make sure that India has to grow holistically. And depending on where the lobbies are stronger, we have seen budgets sometimes being impacted in terms of allocations from that perspective. I suppose budgets in the future gradually will become far more balanced and therefore produce a holistic, comprehensive national strength as our leverage to ensure both our security and our prosperity. I'll stop at that and I look forward if there are any comments and questions. Thank you very much and back to Sid.
Thank you so much, sir. Very, very interesting perspectives. Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of human resources in education, in whether it is in the Indians traveling abroad, where this has not been really much talked about, and also even in veteran care. So overall, human resources are the most important facet of the nation, and it has to be properly understood and taken care of. Thank you very much. Very, very interesting insights. So I would like to now move on to Dr. Lakshman Kumar Behra. Thank you so much, sir, for sitting in so intently and patiently and listening to the thoughts of other experts. I would like to invite you to share your perspectives. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Simi. Thank you, Simi, and IMPRI for having me here for this interesting discussion. When you have five distinguished subject experts having said before you, so I think anything what needs to be said already said. But the advantage of speaking at the last is that you have the perspective of others' presentation, and probably there's something you can add, and I will try my best to add few punches to the discussion. Well, since we are talking about defense and foreign policy budget, I will focus largely on defense budget. Now, there are a lot of figures, a lot of discussions on defense budget, but I think we'll start with a conceptual clarity. So what do we mean by defense budget? I mean, we are referring to this 6.21 lakh crore, and General Chakravorty said pension should be out of this figure. I think every point has a merit. So, I mean, when we talk about the 6.21 lakh crores, we are referring to MOD's overall budget. So whether MOD's overall budget should be counted as defense budget, or a part of MOD's budget should be considered as a part of defense, considered as India's defense budget. I remember, I think few years ago, a part of MOD's budget, which we actually figure out through the defense services estimates, that is largely the military budget. So Army, Navy, Air Force, and maybe ordnance factories and DRDO. These 5 elements, they considered military budget or defense services estimate. Now, out of this 6.21 lakh crore, I think 4.5 lakh crore is the military budget. And the others are there are 2 other components. One is defense sponsor pension, which is quite significant, which is around 1.41 lakh crore. And there is MOD civil estimates, which is around 25,000 or 26,000 crore. Now, whether we should include defense pension, because defense pension is a subject of discussion, and as some experts said, it should not be discussed and it should be separated from defense budget. I mean, we can do that. And for a long time, in fact, until 1990s, I think defense pension was not part of MOD's budget. It was separately allocated by the Ministry of Finance. But the point is, wherever you actually show it, whether it is whether you show it as part of MOD's budget or Ministry of Finance budget or some other ministries, that money has to be generated by the government of India and provided for. Now, budget is a zero-sum game. If government of India has to spend 100 rupees, if 50 rupees spent on Ministry of Defense, then 50 rupees, balance 50 rupees can be spent in other ministries. So wherever you spend, wherever you show pension, so that money will be absorbed and that amount will be less available to other ministries. So I think it's more of an accounting jugglery. So where it doesn't really matter where you put it. So this is the crude reality I think we have to face. The point we are discussing defense pension is because this is a large amount and this affects the government of India's revenue and expenditure. And that is why the government is trying to bring out some reforms. And Agniveer to me is largely because of the defense pension burden. Because we have seen this burden going up and up and up over the years. And some government, at some point has to bite the bullet. I think that Agniveer is the large result of that burden. Well, we saw that the Union budget being presented on July 23rd, and the defense budget was almost same as it was in the interim budget, except 400 crore extra, which was given on the head of Ministry of MOD civil estimates. So 400 extra. Otherwise, the rest of the figures are same as it was in the interim budget. I'm not going into details. So, I mean, what is the revenue? What is the capital? What is the capital procurement? What is the maintenance budget? I think that is largely discussed by previous experts. But I would focus on whether the 6.21 lakh crore is enough to meet the security requirements of our country. Well, I think no amount will be sufficient. So that's the reality. Even US, the biggest military spender in the world, it outspends the next 20 odd countries in the world, and they spend more than around $900 billion. Even there is a shortage. So shortage is a reality, and we have to face that. And do we generally compare our budget with the countries with which we have some challenges or security problems? So it is easy to compare with China. It is easy to compare with Pakistan. Of course, China is far ahead, spending nearly $300 billion, which is almost 3.5 to 4 times bigger than what we spend. Pakistan, of course, given its smaller economy, spends much less, around $8 to $10 billion. So we outspend Pakistan by a huge margin. Now, since we can't increase our budget to the tune of Chinese budget, so we have to manage with our resources. So having said that, I would rather say that there is a huge shortage in our defense budget. If you look at the allocation, if you look at the projections by the armed forces every year to the Ministry of Finance and the amount they get, there is a huge mismatch. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year it was over 1 lakh crore. So 1 lakh crore is the shortage that we face every year in our defense budget. Now, this shortage is there, the government is well aware of. And there is a compulsion. I think Professor Saran Singh was referring that that 1.2 lakh crore or something which is being given to the Ministry of Education is grossly inadequate. So ultimately, it boils down to the broad gun versus butter. So the government has to manage the socio-economic requirements of the country at the same time as the security requirements. So that I mean, every sector, I mean, you speak to the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Health, you would see a gap of projections and the difference between projection, resource projection, and the resource allocation. I think this gap, the Ministry of Defense has to live with it, and it is living with it for a long time. And I think foreseeable future, this gap is likely to remain. But the good thing is that Indian economy is in a good position. Now we are seeing 6 to 7% growth consistently over the years, and there is a likelihood that the growth momentum will continue for a foreseeable future. If economy grows well, then the government will generate more resources, and that extra resources can be devoted to various sectors, and defense will likely to benefit. Now, since there is a huge shortage, so the question boils down whether we are spending our resources quite well, the efficiency of utilization. So I think there is a scope for better utilization. I think some expert who was referring to the manpower cost. I think manpower cost is a sizable cost in our defense budget. So you just take two components, salary and pension of the MOD's budget, it takes around 58%. So I'm not adding housing, clothing, food, ration, other things. So direct and indirect manpower cost would take your share to almost maybe over 60%. So that's a huge one. And if we compare with other countries, so I think we are spending much more on manpower than on technology or the capital procurement or the capital expenditure. For a long time, the government was silent on this. I think the Modi government took a very courageous decision in terms of bringing or announcing the Agnipath scheme. I'm aware of the controversies on the subject, but I think we have to wait and watch. Maybe we have to give 5 to 7 years before we make another course correction of Agnipath. I'm not saying that Agnipath is the final version. There is scope for improvement. There are genuine grievances which we notice in the news reports. But I think manpower reform is crucial for our defense preparedness, for spending more on technology. And I think Agnipath is the right is a kind of solution that the government has actually zeroed in. Now, another problem that we face in our defense budget is the procurement delays. So we have a huge pipeline of procurements, but unfortunately, very few procurements actually fructify on a time and in a time-bound manner and to the costs allocated. We have huge delays, and there are delays of in some major projects, delays of over decades. You take the submarine case. I mean, the Indian Navy is aspiring to get more submarines. I think they should spend more money on submarines, which has a sea denial role, instead of focusing on aircraft carrier. But they can't simply procure the next generation or the new submarines because there are delays in procurement. There are complexities in procurement procedures. I think the government has to focus largely on simplifying, and they have done a lot of reforms in simplifying procurement procedures. Earlier it was defense procurement procedure, now it is renamed as defense acquisition procedure. So a lot of procedural simplification has been done, but I think where the government can actually focus on is organizational structure. So if we are spending 1,30,000 or let's say 1,40,000 on capital acquisition budget every year, so how many people are there in the Ministry of Defense or the Armed Forces headquarters who are actually looking after the capital procurement? I'm afraid that we don't have enough people, and whoever are there in the procurement channel or machinery, they are the bigger problem is that they are not actually expert in procurement matters. I mean, we have a dedicated defense acquisition university in the US, so where the university actually trains people in procurement, but here anybody can come to a procurement job, and if you don't have that kind of knowledge, it is very difficult for any bureaucrat, be in the civil or in the uniform, to take the right kind of decision. So I think that we have to focus on organizational reforms in procurement. Otherwise, you might have money, but you are not able to spend. We have seen that. I mean, the government allocates certain amount for the procurement, but since we have inherent problems in the system, we are not able to utilize. On one hand, we ask more money, but whatever money or funds given, we are not able to utilize. So we can't really justify that, and we can't really ask for more money when we can't spend. And I think well, so what we need to do actually, so there is on one hand shortage, there are delays. So I think we have to focus on how to address these shortage. I accept that we need to step up defense budget, but what should be the size of defense budget? So I think ideally, I mean, there are a lot of discussion that we are spending less than 2% of GDP, it should be 3%. Ukraine is spending 37% of GDP on defense. So should it be linked to GDP? I mean, there is a discussion in NATO that in Trump now, when he was the president, he said, and if any NATO country doesn't spend minimum 2% of GDP on defense, so US won't actually support them if Russia does. And that was a trigger for many NATO countries, European members, to actually step up their defense budget. I think many NATO European countries are actually spending 2% of GDP on their defense. Now, should we spend certain percentage of GDP on defense? And some say 2.5%. I think the moot point is that you need to spend more. And there is a scope for spending more. Maybe we can step up our capital procurement or capital expenditure. But again, it ultimately boils down to broad and butter kind of discussion. So whether the money should be given to Health Ministry, Education Ministry, or Defense Ministry. If additional money is given to Defense Ministry, then that money is not available to the Ministry of Education. And since I am coming from the academia, I have also one grievance that we should be given more money because our infrastructure is not up to that standard. I mean, that discussion is there. So I think that unlike NATO and some other countries, it's not a very mathematical kind of equation that we need to step up to 2.5% GDP. Of course, I mean, we need to spend more on defense. Security is the first priority that everyone accepts. But having said that, I think the government in power has to do the due diligence and do a fine trade-off between socio-economic requirements and defense. The last point I would like to highlight is the budget's impact on Make in India. Now, Make in India has two components. One is your manufacturing, the other is R&D. So I would focus on more on manufacturing. So this Make in India is largely to promote the Indian industry. I think a lot of steps or reforms have been taken over the last 10 years or so. And we are seeing some visible impact. I think Professor DrnSimi was referring to some figures. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, around less than 60% of our capital procurement budget was actually devoted to local procurement. Now that amount is progressively increasing. Now it is almost 76%. So out of 1,39,000 crore, we are spending this year. We have allocated 1,05,000 crore, which is roughly 76%, which I think is a very encouraging sign. Shows that the Make in India is in the right direction. So from 58% to 76% is a huge jump. But having said that, these figures should be taken with a pinch of salt. And even if we are procuring 76% of our spending 76% of our budget for procurement for local sources, but how much of that money is really going to the Indian companies? Because if you look at the Indian companies, let's say take the example of HL. If HL is actually spending 10,000 crore on material procurement, 8,000 is actually going to Russia. Of course, HL is exceptional. It actually works at the cutting edge of technology. It is not so, I mean, import dependency is not so high for other companies, CPRs or other ordnance factories. But we have to also take that into mind, that when we are talking 76%, it is not actually self-reliance. We are not 76% self-reliance. So self-reliance has increased, but it has not increased to the level that we can satisfactorily say that we are in a happy situation. I think we need to promote. For that, I think we need to spend on R&D. Now, R&D budget, which is roughly driven by the DRDO budget, is only 5% of MOD's budget. Now, can you spend only 5% of your budget on R&D and expect that you will be self-reliant? And I'll just give you some figures to make the contrast clear. US spends almost how much? More than DRDO's budget on one weapon program, that is hypersonic. Only one program. And we spend that much amount across the technology sectors, from aircraft to small rifles. So we have to be realistic how much self-reliance we want. And if we want to be self-reliant, we have to put money on R&D I'm not saying put all the money on DRD's basket. There are other schemes, IDEX, TDF, which are doing relatively well. Maybe we have to spread the R&D basket across the sector. We have to identify the new players, particularly in the private sector, startups and small and medium companies. And there was a scheme, in fact, 2-3 years ago, Finance Minister said 25% of R&D budget will be given to the private sector. But when she said R&D budget, whether she referred to DRDO's overall budget or a part of DRDO budget, it was not so clear. So that clarification is required. And then last interim budget, the finance minister said to create some fund to promote startups and deep tech technologies. But this budget was didn't actually throw much light. So we need some clarity on that. And if we want to be really self-planned, then I think we need to spend more on R&D. Simi, I think I will stop at that. Maybe we can take up a few things in the Q&A section. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Behera, for illuminating very important insights. Sir, since you spoke about just 5% allocation to R&D in the MOD budget, I had a very long pending question in my mind was about research security. This is very less talked about in humanities, especially when research projects, academic research projects, when it involves foreign collaborators, and there are a lot of chances that such projects where India is there or any other country in the global south, it may be exploited by the malign actors. If you could throw some light, and of course, the bottom line is that we have to invest heavily on the R&D to ensure self-reliance. But how about your thoughts on research, academic research security? Thank you.
Simi, so I know few labs. I have been to some other countries, and I have seen the contribution, the research contribution of the universities. If you go to Livermore lab or some public universities in the US, if a project is funded by their atomic energy department or their defense department, I mean that part of the lab is totally isolated. I mean, you need the special permission, special verification, etc. I think this is some good practice that we could adopt. So here in India, so much of our R&D, especially the security-oriented R&D, is done by the public sector labs, be it ISRO or the DRDO labs or any other government labs. So as of now, the academia, the industry is not so much involved. They're involved. I know IITs or the industries do some work for the DRDO or ISRO, but those kind of projects that the academia or the private sector do are not so sensitive. And whatever they're doing, it is of recent phenomenon. So I think we have to grow into that kind of stage where the basic research is done by the academics, by the universities. So that is why we need to create proper structures. As of now, our universities are more of interested in publishing papers. If I have a patent, good patent, so I don't get that much of credit. But if I have 10 papers in reputed journals, so my promotion will be faster. So I will be focusing more on writing papers rather than actually inventing something new. So that kind of culture is not there. So our system doesn't actually encourage that. So for the research security, I think your question was more of whether we can isolate those places where those technologies cannot be actually cannot go out from the country. I think we can create those structures. I think Government of India, or we can learn from other countries' best practices. And some universities, some IITs, some universities, even the private sector, I mean, they are doing some classified projects. Your nuclear submarine, your classified projects, and the private sector is also involved. So I have not heard that technologies have been siphoned off or somebody else is taken out. So I think that's not much of a big problem. So as of now, that concern should not be there, at least for us. And so we should actively encourage the academia and the industry to take up more R&D, especially for defense and strategic domains.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Behera. So we are well beyond our time, but still I would like the experts to just focus on the way forward. Where are we moving towards in terms of the union budget or generally in defense and foreign policy? So I would request Professor Bhattacharya to go first. We can have a minute of the perspectives. Thank you. Professor Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Simi. In fact, before commenting on that, I'd just like to comment on Professor Behra and something that the Major General also said. Professor Behra, in fact, the DRDO has been giving, research and development work to various universities. My university, Jadavpur University, there is a building there which has been there ever since I joined, which was way back in 1990. Well, that's a Jubilee building, to which, in fact, we had no entry without permission. And it's only once in all my years there that I could enter it I had to meet someone there for some work. And they do very specialized work for the DRDO. And this has been going on, it's not recent. It's been going on for a very long time. And we have no idea, basically, what work goes on there. It's not really publicized. They get components. And I'm sure IITs like IIT Kharagpur, they also have these. Okay, so basically, JNU. I'm also from JNU. JNU does not have that kind of engineering section, so maybe it doesn't get. So there are other universities in India which do get. Okay, and I'm sure in the south also, in Chennai and all that, there must be universities which are getting this. Major General K Chakravorty, you said that I talked about cutting down on personnel. No, not at all. In fact, what I said was that on the one hand, there are new methods, okay, of war, etc., which are coming up, which need to be thought about. But at the same time, India has a special problem because of its long coastline and its long borders with Pakistan and China, both of which are not friendly. So on the one hand, we have this problem of personnel and a lot of money being spent on basically personnel. But we do need the personnel on the board. As you said, it's very, very necessary to have people, all right, to have soldiers, to have officers there. So now that there are new departments within the Ministry of Defense which are working, they should think about how to coordinate. And this is one of the ways to go forward. They should think about how to coordinate the two. Well, the new technology, you can see the kind of warfare that is going on, whether it's in the Ukraine or Gaza or any other part of the world, which actually does not need so much of manpower as it needs basically technology. So how to balance the two so that budget will always be there, but the personnel will always be there, and budget for the personnel will always be there. Pensions, of course, because they've served the country. I mean, as teachers also, those of us, the three of us from academia who are here, all right, we also, I am retired, so I get a pension. Without that, my retired life would be, rather difficult. So obviously, for the armed forces also, it'd be difficult. So it is very, very necessary. All that has to be there and factored in, but they need to work out some kind of an India model. All right, that is what I was talking about. A different model which does not have to follow any others, but which meets our particular needs. All right, how do we tackle this? How do we basically look at the new wars, the new warfare, the science of warfare, and at the same time our needs, India's needs? Okay, so that goes there. Now the way forward, as I said, is and I've been repeating this, and others have also said it. The ambassador who spoke after me also talked about it. We need to cooperate, coalesce, all right, as such, and to bring in other ministries, experts from academia, from technology, from the private sector, so that basically, because the budget is there, there's that much GDP, and there's that much allocation. India, of course, comes first. I mean, things like agriculture, employment, youth employment, R&D, all that comes in. Okay. At the same time, we need to think in terms of defense and foreign policy, and in the current world, that is very, very important. So how do we manage it all? Now we can manage it through basically pooling resources, pooling ministries' efficiencies or capabilities, so that we can get the maximum out of something, or data set. For instance, somebody did point out about Japan. I think it was Mr. Sachdev who talked about it. Japan, all right. I mean, how they do R&D, how they basically look into it. So there's the finance ministry. There are others, all right, who can look into other things, who can basically use their expertise And then, of course, the Ministry of External Affairs does not need to be a salesman, all right, to bring in investment. Okay, well, use the diplomats to at a later level, all right, as such. After that is done, to see how best, also to liaison, all right, with the locals, all right. Honorary consuls is a very good idea. I mean, I personally have had this experience. We had honorary consul for an Indian, honorary consul for South Africa over here. I was not getting a visa because I wanted it very fast. I didn't have time. And finally, I went to him and he got it to me in 2 days. Well, the embassy here, I'd gone to the MEA also. They said that it would take at least 15 days, but I needed to go in 7 days. And this honorary consul was Indian in Calcutta. Okay, he somehow pulled strings and he knew the right people in the South African embassy, and he got it. So basically, I think local knowledge is also important. I mean, because they have liaison. He trades with South Africa, so he knows them. He managed to get it. So basically, I think this idea of honorary consuls, or because we can't expand, we don't have the money to expand the Indian Foreign Service, then, well, use what you have. All right. That is what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya. I would like to invite Mr. Rabinder Sachdev for his concluding thoughts.
Thank you so much, Simi, and been a pleasure, real pleasure to learn and absorb from all brilliant minds. Couple of bullet points here. Okay, on the question of pensions in budget, out of budget, I'll absolutely go with the idea they should remain in the budget. It gives us the punch, the optics that India's defense budget is X billion dollars, right? The world is looking. When they're looking, that's an absolute must. How you manage the pensions, I mean, one way or the other, the government has to pay it out. If it can be better administered, whichever way, but keep it within the umbrella. By the way, Pakistan, Musharraf, in his times, they took out the pensions outside the military budget. Okay. And now the IMF, for the loan tranches and all, has been telling Pakistan to bring back the pensions into the defense budget so that they can tell Pakistan to reduce its overall defense budget for the linking of the IMF reforms and all. So budgets, pensions very much. In fact, if needed, add in some more. Let the world think we have the punch and gravitas. Okay, that's one. The issue of the honorary consul generals, absolutely, yes. I remember way back in 92, I was involved in helping to set up the honorary consul general of Tajikistan in India. Tajikistan, newly independent, had no resources, So one top hotelier here, in fact, it was Lalit Suri, I think, in Friends Colony, now the Surya Hotel and all. He was known through some friends and he was happy to offer a room in his hotel, and boom. And he got a diplomatic car, number plate, and invited to diplomatic functions and all. So having honorary consul generals is absolutely a very smart tool, I would say, and we should leverage it in whichever countries we can. Okay, coming back in the overall sense, yeah, see, bottom line is that our economy has to increase if we need more money for our budgets, right? Whatever be the percentages, whatever be the actual numbers, the more our economy progresses, grows, the more whatever be the percentage, 1.9, 2, 2.2, or the balancing the government has to do, it has more money to, manage, as well said by everyone. It's a balancing act the government has to do across all sectors. It's not only defense, it's education, it's health, name it, whatsoever, etc. Right? So number one, economy has to improve. Secondly, in a way, as I mentioned earlier, the way I look at the world is now, is a new world matrix under construction. This matrix is not finalized yet. It won't ever be, of course. But there is the new world order that we talk. So this matrix, which is under construction, yes, definitely requires us, from a foreign policy perspective, I think, to be agile, to make whatever more and more, to create reasons for more and more linkages, be it through the honorary consul generals, be it through that chamber of MSc, which the government is now talking about, setting up, be it through diaspora, diaspora linkages, be it through cultural diplomacy, ICCR has its own. As to the point of Professor Swaran Singh and all panelists, that and Professor Bhattacharya is also, and generals also, the money that the MEA has, sure, is one bit, but there are multiple pieces which are floating around. Culture Ministry, I think ICCR comes within the Cultural Ministry. So that budget, the DG, ICCR is spending so much money on cultural diplomacy for India. soft or whatever ways, right? So that being there, tourism, tourism promotion and all, also there is again, once again, movement of people, foreign people coming to India or Indians going abroad. It's creating more linkages. Anyway, so in this new world matrix, partnerships will, I will not say be transient, but everybody is looking out for the interest. Even the smallest, teeniest of the countries today is very clear about what it wants and wants to get away with it. Those times are gone, I think perhaps 10, 20 years ago, when countries would kind of bow down. Right now, even a tiny country would say to the US, no, yes, no, whatever. Everybody is kind of getting aware and is aware of their self-core interest. But the matter is, how much can you really, what degrees of freedom do you have to express your, freedoms of operation, whatever. So increase the economy, new world matrix under construction, go at it, keep on at it. Pensions within the defense budget. Yeah, I think more or less some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Major General, your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just go to the way forward. And the first is theaterization. We need to integrate the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. Let's have today theater commands. Let's get on to it. You'll find automatically all these issues which you spoke of, this entire thing. Today we've got 17, force commanders. They'll be reduced to about 6 as the time goes. You join these 3 services as has been done in procurement. It'll be a big issue. Next is get the private sector and startups in a bigger way. They are not in a big way. And I agree with Lakshman Mehta, who said very clearly that you start a process which is supposed to end in about, say, 3 years. It goes on sometimes 15, 20, 30 years. Now, that is the main thing. Third thing which I want to say, whatever you produce in the country must be exported for defense. This is your only way of survival. Otherwise, that industry, let's say today, L&T makes the K9 Vajra. If today that is not exported, if we are lucky that today we had ordered amount, the amount had to be doubled because the equipment was fit for high altitude. Now that's a stroke of luck. But otherwise, we have to have any item, like say today L&T Tata's made Pinaka, it's now purchased by Army. Amos has been made today by a collaboration with DRDO. If this is done, this has to be a principle. Then we will get this Atmanirbhar process right, everything right. Even the budget will work out nice because then we will be working in close consonance with this. Last point, technology. Undoubtedly, artificial intelligence and quantum are going to play a major part. You get these 2 inside, you will definitely optimize your budget. After all, as correctly brought out, I think Mr. Ravinder is very correct. We can't decide maybe 1.9%, 2.2, 2.3. This is an issue for the government to decide. But the moment you get AI and this, at least you optimize. You'll be able to deal with situations.
Thank you, Major General. Professor Swaran Singh.
Thank you, Simi. First, I think about this honorary consuls. Definitely, that's a great idea. But is India in shortage of its own people? 25 million Indians are abroad. I think the first port of call should be Indians who are all over the world. And this will do 3 things. One, it will reconnect Indian diaspora much more institutionally with India. It could be also cost effective compared to some other local citizens, using them and sort of making use of Indians who are around the world. They should be having a certain priority in who should be your honorary consuls. And third, this could also perhaps be one way to take care of what is a decade-long debate of lateral entries into Ministry of External Affairs or into Government of India. I have no idea. I keep hearing for about 10 years that Ministry of External Affairs is shortage of staff, shortage of IFS officers. But I haven't seen too many lateral entries being done or being made easy. But forget lateral entries, just better coordination with a whole lot of think tanks, universities, where the talent is lying. And more often, everybody is reinventing their own wheel in their own cocoon. Government of India is paying for all of them. I'm paid by Government of India's budget. And if I can be more closely engaged with doing things that are directly of demand or use, that would be better use of money. I'm not being asked is a happy situation. I can just keep sleeping for the rest of my life. That's another choice many of people like me are making. So I think let's focus on maximizing with minimum cost. In that sense, engaging Indians around the world would be a much useful exercise. Similarly, defense budget, how can it expand? It should become much more, in universities, we keep hearing, we are being told, you should be you should self-generate your funds. You should have paid, masters and undergraduates. Self-financing programs are being launched. So why not focus much more on expanding defense exports, which again does three things. One, it makes, possibility of moving from make in India to made in India much faster. I heard Dr. Vera talk about even when we have local indigenous providers of equipment, much of the smarter technologies in that equipment are simply procured from abroad in that sense. So we could make Indian industry much more competitive. It could make Indian defense budget far more autonomous, and it could expand much more than it can otherwise. And that's why last point, the budget this year has, I think the total revenue generation is about 32 lakh crores, and the outlays are about 48 lakh crores. So 1.5 times compared to the money government has, government is planning to spend. So in that sense, I think that tax compliance in this country is something that remains a major issue. Just ratcheting up and raising taxes has not proven to be very effective. And what we need is going beyond 1.5 or 2% of Indians paying taxes to much larger number of Indians complying and paying taxes. Process should be easy. It has been tried, but some more innovative ways of how the tax base and tax compliance both need to go up. So once we have the larger pie that we are debating and dissecting, each of the sectors, therefore, then perhaps we'll be able to claim and get a little more resources from India. And of course, even larger challenge of keeping growth rates as high as possible. We were talking about 8.3%, but now we hear 6 to 7%. So, growth rate has to be also maintained at much higher level, so that whether it is a punch of the Ministry of Defense or it is the promise of friendship of Ministry of External Affairs, it should be constantly becoming more effective and more resourced in that sense. So whether it is self-generation resources at the level of each of the ministries or at generation resources at the national level of the union government itself, that I think is something where the national focus has to be in future. And I think that is where I see India trying to sort of gain more traction. And hopefully things will get better. I mean, if you look at 70 years back, we have done much better than how we started in 1947. Hopefully we'll do better in coming times. But if it is more equitable, if it is more justiciable, it is more efficient and faster, that is the aim, I think, in future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Behra, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Simi. So I think I have 2-3 points to add. So I think the first thing that I would like to see in the future budget is higher allocation for R&D, overall R&D, including defense R&D. And we have to accept that our R&D spending is much less compared to what other countries spend. In fact, we'll be surprised to know that our entire R&D budget, India's entire R&D budget, is probably less than what one company like Huawei or Samsung spend each year. So we have to step up to create new technologies, and that is the only way we can be more self-reliant in technology, including defense technologies. And the second thing I would like to see in the future budgets is implementation of Make India projects in defense. The government over the last 10 years has taken many reforms. I think this is the time now to actually to focus on implementation. So if the government of India or the Ministry of Defense has identified 400 items which would be procured from the local sources, I think now is the time to actually go for contracting stage, tendering stage, and make sure that those 500 projects are actually contracted out to the local industry over the period of 4 to 5 years. Third and last point is we have to stay focused on manpower reforms. Agnipath scheme was a very bold and courageous step taken by the government. It had a lot of political repercussions, and the government was well aware of that and took the decision. There are a lot of pressures. I'm not saying there are no scope for fine-tuning the Agnipath scheme. In fact, there are there, but the spirit of Agnipath should not be diluted. The spirit of Agnipath is to lower the age profile of the army and to lower or to control the manpower cost. That core spirit should not be diluted. Any reform in the Agnipath. These are 3 small points I want to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has indeed been a very comprehensive and fascinating discussion today. And on a personal note, I really enjoyed it, and I am inspired by your presence and your wonderful, well-informed perspectives. Thank you so much. And just to conclude, there is no doubt that we are living in times of high volatility in the immediate and also in the extended neighborhood. We must definitely give, as experts have really pointed out, that we must really give the Agniveers a chance to be able to do a course correction if the need be in the coming years. And it is very important to also spend on R&D, private sector, for self-reliance. But while we should continue with our war preparedness, I think we should also not lose sight of the peace and peaceful coexistence. Because or some may say that there can be no peace without war, but India must really not shy away from advocating or articulating the tenets of peace. The UN Security Council expansion does not seem to be really happening, or in the way that India is asking for it in the near future. India must really harness the exceptional talent base for establishing global peace and global order, or in the words of Mr. Robinder, the global matrix. So let us all continue to focus on our areas of research and our areas of practice. And we really, on behalf of IMPRI, would like to express my heartiest gratitude to each of the experts present here today for illuminating us with your exceptional thoughts. Thank you very much. I would really like to now call upon Shweta to take it forward and conclude the session. Thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was an extremely interesting session. With your permission, ma'am, we can go for a vote of thanks.
Yes, please.
Okay. So as we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Shweta, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation, a panel discussion on defense, foreign policy, and the Union Budget 2024-25. As a part of IMPRI 5th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget 2024-25. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, our esteemed panelists, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya ji, Major General Dr. K Chakravorty ji, Mr. Rabinder N. Sachdev ji, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat ji, Dr. Lakshman Behra ji, Professor Swaran Singh ji for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.